When I was 18, I worked at a local Target. This is when we used to have a wall next to the registers filled with Pokemon, baseball, collectible cards, etc., and Starbucks in front of the register by the doors. For context, I'm female. Well, one day, I was filling this wall with more cards, and an awkward, tall man came up and started looking at the Pokemon section next to me. He asked, "Do you like Pokemon?" I said yes, which then led to us talking about Pokemon. I didn't think anything of it. He picked some, checked out, and left. 3 days later, he returns to the store, finds me, and buys me candy and tells me to have a nice day. So things start escalating. He would come in frequently looking for me, started sitting at the Starbucks tables and watching me while I work, which then eventually he started buying me more candy, Starbucks drinks, flowers, and then little girls' panties, pacifiers, little girl hair accessories, which of course, I'm freaked out. I tried telling my bosses. They couldn't do anything about it. Called the cops, and they couldn't do anything either. He followed me to the back room one day since I started leaving the registers whenever he came into the store. And that's when we were able to call the cops because he cornered me in the back room. But thankfully our stockroom guys were back there and basically saved me. We were able to get a restraining order on him for the store so he couldn't enter anymore. But that's when he started waiting outside for me, following me to my car and leaving love notes on my vehicle for me to come out to. It was terrifying, and my mom knew, but again, we couldn't do anything. One day, he actually followed me from my work to my mother's house where I lived at the time. I had never seen his car until this day, and stood outside the house, singing love songs and reading poems he wrote me, loudly. My mother called the cops. We kept telling him to leave, and when the cops got there, they were finally able to get him to go away. But now he left me notes at my house, sent me letters and packages with all sorts of illicit material, sexy outfits, girly panties, baby stuff, etc. During all of this, my mom and I were trying to get a restraining order on him ourselves and charge him for harassment, but it's not like it stopped him. Finally, one night, I was coming home from work. He waited around the corner of my house and attacked me. He grabbed me around my face and dragged me to the ground. I screamed so loud and so much that luckily I had neighbors come outside and help me. He was arrested at that point. I had enough evidence saved up to be able to take him to court, and now he's been in jail for 8 years, due to be released in 2021. He's actually in the Jester 4 unit. He was stalking another local girl that I was connected with so we could help each other out after he got sent away. She was just starting to get his attention, so luckily she never got hurt. He's been sending me letters in jail ever since, so I suppose now I have a stalker who's in the slammer. In my 8th grade year, I moved in with a family member after my mother passed away, and this family member lived pretty far into the country. Because of this, I had to ride the school bus to my new school. I used to live in town before the move, so this was the first time on a bus, besides school field trips, but then there were other adults present. In the morning, there were about 6 or 7 students on the bus, and I was the first person to be picked up and the last one to be dropped off after school. For the first few weeks of school, everything seemed fine. Students were quiet, everyone kept to themselves, headphones in and whatnot. Being the first to get on, I always headed straight to the back of the bus to avoid everyone. Not that I had an issue with anyone, I was just socially awkward, and the more people I could avoid talking to, the better. As for my bus driver, we can call him Tom, he seemed like a normal bus driver. He didn't say a word to anyone and just did his job. He began getting a little friendlier to me when he dropped me off, since I was the last to get off, but it was never anything strange. It was a smile and see you in the morning or a have a nice night, nothing I would ever suspect. Things continued like this for a while, nothing exciting happening until me, being a 15-year-old girl who had just lost her mother, decided to throw a giant tantrum and beg that I no longer wanted to live with this family member. I missed the more populated city, my old friends, and my old school. So about 2 months into going to this school, I decided to move back with another family member, and this is where the story shifts. On the last week of my bus rides, I told Tom I would no longer be taking his bus anymore, as I was homesick and moving back home. He asked me to sit up towards the front of the bus for the rest of that week so he could say goodbye better. I didn't think anything of it. He was a 40 to 50-year-old man who never gave me any red flags. I listened and moved to the seat right behind him so he could look at me through the large mirror above him and we could chat. It all seemed innocent at first. He asked about my mother, why I was leaving, what I wanted to do when I grew up, blah blah blah. The last few things of riding the bus, the questions got stranger, and I may have not been able to see the signs of a creep, but I knew the questions weren't things a middle-aged man should be asking a teenage girl. If anything, I thought he was just being nosy. He asked if I had a boyfriend, if I had my first kiss yet, and what an ideal date for me would be. I answered honestly, but with a weird feeling in my stomach. Gut feelings are 500% real. On my final day riding the bus, as I got on, Tom asked me if I would sit in the front again, but wait until everyone else was off the bus. I agreed, going back to my past seat in the back of the bus and waited until everyone got off. I moved to the seat behind him again, but this time he didn't say anything to me. At first, I probably should have mentioned earlier, but from the last stop before me and my stop, there was about a 25 to 30-minute driving distance. I'd say he didn't say a word to me for about 20 minutes of that time. I sat listening to my music until we pulled the bus over. We were on my road and I knew my family member's house was close ahead, yet he pulled over and stopped the bus. If I could explain to you the fear that ignited in me when the bus came to a halt, and Tom turned in his chair so he was facing me with a smile on his face, I would. I had seen one too many movies with creepy men doing things that shouldn't be done to teenage girls and expected the worst. I was expecting to be assaulted, kidnapped, harmed, or worse, but it never came to that. Instead, Tom told me to take my phone out and add his number to it. He said he would be here if I needed to talk about my mother, telling me the story of his own mother and things I can't really remember. I just remember it being an innocent conversation, no matter how weird you might think it is for a bus driver to offer a teenager his number. He dropped me off after that, and we said our goodbyes. Years passed, and I was in 10th grade when I saw Tom again. I still had his number in my contacts, but I never contacted him. Even when things got rough, because truly, what girl would call a strange bus driver when she needed help? Not me. I was at Walmart with a few friends and we decided to split up to get things we individually needed. I headed off to get a box of Q-tips when I heard someone say my name. I could tell it was a male's voice, and I figured it would just be a male teacher I had once had. It was Tom, but I couldn't tell at first. He had grown out his facial hair and I honestly had just forgotten about him, but once he said hello to me, I remembered everything. I wasn't necessarily scared, I just found it odd that this man who was my bus driver for a few months remembered me after 2 years. It was a pretty simple conversation. He asked how I had been and how high school was going for me, and I answered, not really bothered to ask how he was. We said our goodbyes, and I met back up with my friends, explaining to them the whole story of Tom, to which they all found it scary that I never told anyone my bus driver gave me his number and asked me strange questions. I explained I thought he was just being friendly because I truly did. I haven't seen Tom in person since then. Years have gone by, I'm in college, and I thought the story was over then. Just some overly friendly bus driver. They could have stayed innocent, right? About a month ago, I was talking to someone I went to school with at the other school, and I mentioned to her how scared I was thinking about the bus out there because of Tom. She was shocked I had mentioned him and asked for the full story. I told her a summary of it, the questions, the stopping the bus to give me his number, the encounter at Walmart. I told her he just gave me the creeps and I hoped I would never see him again. This is when I found out that Tom had been arrested for assaulting 2 minors. She not only showed me his mugshot, but told me what had happened. My story nearly lined up perfectly with these 2 other children. bus driver who asked personal questions, offered his phone number and comfort to children with trauma and acted on it. The only difference was I got out of there. If I hadn't moved back to my hometown, I still wonder what could have happened to me. I'm extremely lucky that I never contacted his number, and I feel sorry for the 2 kids that did contact him, feeling they could trust this man. This happened about 5 years ago, but it was such a traumatic experience for me that I remember most of the events in pretty vivid detail. I have PTSD from the experience still that sometimes demobilizes me when I'm home alone, and I only feel safe in the place when I know I have something to defend myself with in every room. I lived in a small ground-floor basement apartment building briefly in college with my now ex-boyfriend Ryan and another roommate, Alice, who we didn't know previously to moving in. This small apartment building faced another identical one, and the drive sloped down by quite a bit to the side of our building, so the front of our basement apartment was mostly below ground level, but the back was fully exposed and had a back door that opened into a wooded area that you could get to from the parking lot. The front door was inside the building, and you had to go down a flight of stairs from the main front entrance to get to it. We'd been living there for about a month when I was doing laundry one stormy night, and strange things started to happen. The laundry room was right across the hall, and I'd walk back across to grab more quarters and say something to my boyfriend quickly, so I hadn't closed the front door all the way. I was talking to my boyfriend when I saw the door move a little bit. I thought it was a change in air pressure from the front door to the building being opened initially, so I kept talking, but kept an eye on it. Then I watched as it opened a few more inches. I told my boyfriend to come over, and he rounded the corner just in time to see it open by several more inches. "I see it," he said, and ran out the door. Our front door was at the end of a pretty long hallway, and the door was hung in such a way that I couldn't see who had been standing on the other side of it. Ryan came back and said that he'd chased after them just in time to see a white tennis shoe and a pale but really hairy leg going up the stairs, and that it looked like they'd gone out from the front door of the building, but it was dark and pouring out and he couldn't find anyone. We kinda just shook it off because we lived near campus and thought some idiot had stumbled home drunk and tried to come in the wrong apartment. 2 or 3 weeks later, it stormed really badly again. This was a really janky college apartment that only had a window AC in the living room, and it was September and still really hot, so we had to sleep that night with the bedroom doors open to get some airflow from the AC. The next morning, I walked into the bathroom to take a shower and saw a bunch of dead bugs in the bathtub, as well as mud and what looked like a footprint. I was mad and thought that Alice had opened the little window in the shower the night before when it was raining, and the rain had just swept some dead bugs in off the window track. I was noticing at this point that she did some weird voyeuristic things like opening the window in the shower while she was showering. There was a line of parking spots right outside, and you could see down, right into the shower from a parked car with the window open, and leaving her blinds open at night while she had guys in her room. Again, you could see right inside. So I made a mental note to mention it to her later. It wasn't until a few days later that Ryan and I were walking down the slope out front and noticed a twisted window screen laying in the grass right outside the bathroom window. I picked it up and my heart absolutely sank. It looked like it had been ripped out of the window. I walked inside and asked Alice about the mud in the bathtub and the footprints and dead bugs, and she said she hadn't opened the window recently. I suddenly put 2 and 2 together and realized that someone had pulled the screen out of the window and come in that night, brushing dead bugs off of the window track and leaving muddy footprints in the bathtub, and that we had been sleeping with the door open that night. We looked all around the apartment and couldn't find anything that might have been stolen. Our TV and laptops had been sitting right out in the living room, and they didn't look like they had been touched. We called the police. They came and took a statement and left, but said that since nothing had been taken, there really wasn't much that they could do. I could tell at the time that they thought we were overreacting and didn't really believe that anyone had come inside. My now ex was an absolute idiot and, against my urging, put a sign up on the bathroom window that said something along the lines of, "We know we were broken into and are on alert," and was written on a bright pink note card. We had those old windows in the apartment that slid open horizontally but didn't really lock properly, so I took a heavy stick I had found out in the woods and jammed it in place to stop the window from opening. One night we were up late playing a board game and I went to use the bathroom, saw the shadow of the stupid note on the opaque window and went back. Alice went to use the bathroom a few minutes later and came back hysterical because the note had been ripped off. We called the police and they stopped by to take a statement and said that they were going to look around the neighborhood. Since the first note had worked so well, Ryan, for reasons I can't fathom, decided to put another sign up, this time on a bright green note card. He opened the window, yelled, and slammed it shut again. I had just had time to catch a glimpse of something white right outside the window next to his face. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack because I thought it had been a face at the window. But Ryan said it had been a pair of white shoes and that they had looked the same as the ones on the person who had tried to come in before. He still put the sign up against my pleading. I called the police back and they were back within a couple of minutes, looking annoyed. Apparently, they had been just about to pull out of the parking lot when the call came back in from the dispatcher and they said they hadn't seen anyone out in the parking lot. I explained to them that there was enough of a slope next to the front windows that if someone was standing there, and there were cars parked in the parking spots, you wouldn't be able to see them from the streets. One of them told us that he was going to wait around for a bit in his car to see if he could see any suspicious activity. It was a while later when he came back and told us that he hadn't seen anything, and that he had even checked the hoods of the cars outside for warmth to see if any of them had been running recently. I asked him if he had seen anything else like this recently, and when he said no, asked him what he thought this person wanted. He said he did believe us because he could see how shaken we all were, and that maybe this person was just bored and messing with us. I kept reiterating the length of time between these events and the fact that nothing had been stolen out of our apartment when they had more than likely entered the other night. He then admitted that the person could be mentally ill and had possibly developed an unhealthy obsession with one of us. He suggested some ways to improve our home security and left for the night. After he had left, we decided to stay up. We spent the night being pretty quiet, listening for sounds. I want to say it was maybe an hour later. Ryan looked over at the back door and I heard an, "Oh no," and I saw a piece of something bright green poking through by the back door. He opened the door slightly and pulled through a green note card that had somehow been stuffed through the space between the door and the frame. We had been sitting quietly the whole time and hadn't heard the screen door open. He looked outside and didn't see anyone. I became convinced at that point that this person was having fun messing with us and was pretty terrified by the fact that they had been scared of the police's presence. I strongly suspected at that point that the pink card sign was going to make its way back to us, and I wanted to catch them in the act. So we all positioned ourselves looking in different directions and staked the exits and the bathroom window out. It must have been another hour that passed before we finally got sick of sitting there and stood up and started talking about going to bed because it was almost dawn by that point. This conversation maybe went on for 5 to 10 minutes, and when I looked back at the front door, which I had been watching, the pink note card was lying on the floor, slipped under the door. Things escalated by quite a bit in my remaining time there. For the next month, we'd wake up to the sound of windows getting pounded on, or it would happen when we turned on the lights in certain rooms. We installed a motion detector by the back door, but it never once went off for anyone other than us. The parking lot was pretty poorly lit, so was the wooded area out back, so I put the brightest bulbs I could out by the back door. I came out one morning to find the light bulbs smashed and the metal light covers missing. We eventually found them out a few feet into the woods, smashed like someone had stomped on them. Every light bulb we put out there after that got smashed. I had to walk home from work because none of us had cars and spotted the shadow of a male figure standing by the identical building across from ours. When they noticed I had spotted them, they took off running. This happened several more times to my boyfriend and roommate, where they would see the shape of someone out back and that person would take off running behind the garages or into the woods when spotted. I woke up pretty early one morning when it was still dark to work on homework and saw a light coming from the living room window, like someone was trying to see through the slots on the blinds with a flashlight, which we thankfully had curtains to block. Everything came to a head one night when Ryan and I decided to run to Walmart with a friend. Alice had a really ridiculous habit of drinking while she was cleaning the apartment. I had discovered by that point that she had a pretty serious problem with mixing her medication with a lot of alcohol and leaving the back door open because she didn't like the smell of the cleaning products. I had asked her numerous times not to do this, obviously because of all the issues we'd been having, so she said she wouldn't. We got to Walmart, and I'm standing in the hair color aisle when I start getting all these frantic texts from Alice telling me to call her. I called her, and she was hysterical and said, "2 guys just tried to come in here. You need to come now. The police are on their way." Apparently, she had opened the door as soon as we had left, even though I had told her she absolutely needed to leave it locked, and 2 guys had walked in through the screen door. She apparently screamed at the top of her lungs and covered her face, and when she looked up, they were gone. She was pretty drunk by that point, and I strongly suspected she was also high from mixing it with her medication. The police were there by the time we got back, and I watched, with my heart completely sinking, as the officer made disbelieving looks at her while she gave a description of the 2 guys. She was absolutely hysterical by that point and clearly under the influence, so she kept getting tripped up by questions the police asked and changing her answers. What we got out of it was that there were 2 white guys, one taller and blonde and the other slightly shorter, but pale with dark black hair. Ryan's friend who had been at Walmart with us said that description fit 2 guys who had walked into the restaurant that he and Ryan worked at a couple of weeks prior. He said the guys walked in, looked around and tried to see who was in the kitchen area, then left. He only remembered it because of how suspiciously they were behaving, but he didn't have a whole lot of details on them either. I moved out shortly after. Ryan left to go to a different college, we broke up, and I didn't want to stick around alone in a place where I felt like my life was constantly in danger. I also didn't want to live with someone who wasn't going to take my home security seriously and advised Alice to also move. My best guess at this point is that these 2 guys lived in one of the surrounding buildings because of how they were able to disappear and reappear so suddenly, but also in such spaced-out intervals. It's only conjecture, but I think that because I must have personally seen Alice bring around 30 guys back to the apartment in the time I lived there, one of them might have been someone she met at a bar, or someone who might have watched everything that went on in her room and developed an obsession. I can't prove any of that, and it bothers me endlessly that I don't have an answer. We were never able to even get close to catching them because of the layout of the apartment building, and because their attacks were so random. I live in the same town still, and the sight of those woods in my old apartment building still gives me goosebumps. I never got to find out who they were or what they wanted, and that bothers me to no end. It brought chills to my bones just recounting everything, and I don't think I've ever truly felt safe being home alone since that happened. At the time of writing, I am 16, female, and this happened from the time I was 9 till I was 14. When I was in primary school, 4 years old till 11 years old, I had a best friend, Marie. Marie's parents were split up and her father lives on the same street as me, whilst her mother lived a town over. She spent the week with her mum and the weekends with her father. I would often go to his house and play with Marie. We play hide and seek and pretend and other games like that. Marie wasn't exactly the best child, and her play fights left me with scratches and bruises. Her father spoiled her and always had sweets and money in the house. He was always on dating sites or Facebook and was an avid Arsenal fan, watching every single game. In the summer, if I was playing in my garden, I could hear him shouting at his TV because of a match outcome or goal. He would take me and Marie out and would buy us McDonald's and once a pillow pet because I wanted one so badly. I remember my mom being kind of weirded out when I said that Marie's dad bought it for me. He would take us swimming too, but I don't remember much of those trips. Marie's father was around 5'11", stocky with a bald head and ears that stuck out. He had a very kind smile and was soft-spoken with a very, very deep voice. I used to walk home from school and he would often wave out of an upstairs bedroom window down at me. I would wave back and smile and say hi and he'd return it. The summer of me turning 10, I was over at their house almost every weekend. When I was 11, Marie moved with her mother to a seaside town and we went to a different secondary school. I lost touch with Marie and never really hung out with her again. I need to lay out how my route home is for this next bit to make sense, and I'm really sorry if this is a bit confusing. My road is like an L, with the longer part being a tarmac road and the shorter part is up a hill. I could walk up this road to my house. This was at the top of the hill. The houses are like a T, with a row of terraced houses along the top of the hill and another row going down the hill along the road. The backs of the houses face the road and an alleyway leads around to the front of the houses, and I could also walk along this alley to get to my house. Whichever way I took to my house, Marie's father would see me as he lived around halfway up the hill in a row of terraced houses that went down the hill next to the road. When I'm in my room at home, with the blinds up, I can see Marie's father's house. Let's call Marie's father Ken. Ken would open his window, lean out, and watch me from his window. It would take me a few minutes to notice him watching me, and as my bed was right next to the window, I would often be in my pajamas or minimal clothing. I would wave or smile, and he would cheerily wave back. I would close my blind and wait a couple of minutes before opening it, and he would be gone. This happened multiple times. My mother put in a net curtain for me so that nobody could see in my window. I change my sheets at night and do it often in my underwear, as my bed is in a weird position and changing sheets requires a lot of effort. I have to sit in my windowsill, so I would often have to remove the net curtain. I have no idea how many times he has watched me contort and struggle to change my sheets, bearing in mind I was around 13 or 14 when I began noticing these things. I walk home from my bus stop the same way I'd walk home from primary school, and every single way I would take to walk home, Ken would always see me, would always say hello and smile like he was expecting me or something. It really creeped me out. I began to get scared to see him. My heart would race and I began to completely ignore him as I walked home, earphones in my ears blasting music. I thought he was watching me, waiting for me every day. One day when I was 14, I tested my theory. There were two ways I could walk past Ken's house. Both would lead me home. The first way was the way I usually walked, along the tarmac road and up into my back garden. It passed the back of his house. However, from the bottom of the hill, I would be able to see his window and see if he was there waiting for me, and I could divert my route to go around the front of his house, along an alley, up the hill and to my front door instead of my back. One day, I saw him in the window at the back of his house, and I tried not to give off that I knew he was watching me. Without stopping on my route, I diverted the walk up the alley in front of his house. He had crossed along the top floor of his house. When I reached his house, some way up the hill, he was looking down at me from the window at the front of his house. He was definitely watching me. I power walked home and immediately dug up Marie's contact info. I told her to tell Ken to stop watching me walk home and that I thought it was creepy. She did so and told me Ken was only waiting for his girlfriend to get home and that he always watched for her. I can hear every car on my street pull up from my house, and I never heard any the hour after I got home. I know Ken's girlfriend drives a BMW and I know what it sounds like. Luckily, he stopped watching me after that, and I've never really seen him again. This story happened almost 10 years ago. I'll jump right in because it's long. I got home from work one day and logged into Facebook to find a message from someone I didn't know. It was too long ago to remember verbatim what was said, but it was along the lines of, "Hey, I know you have no idea who I am, but I've been trying to decide what to do for a few days and figured I had to let you know what's been going on. Someone has been catfishing me using your identity for over 2 years, and I just found out about it last week. The sender of the email was clearly pretty shaken up and understandably was experiencing a mix of emotions. According to her, she had met the imposter online a little over 2 years prior to her writing this, and that they had been engaged in a pretty intimate long-distance relationship for a majority of that time. The imposter had created a Facebook and had over time reposted almost all of my photos with their own captions to them, including a good amount of art I'd drawn that they took credit for. They created fake profiles for a good amount of my close family and friends so that they could comment on the photos of themselves to make the profile seem legit. The funniest part to me is that although most things in my real life seemed to be mirrored in this fake profile, I, a straight male, was instead portrayed as trans. I think the main reason for this was that the sender of the email and the imposter would actually speak on the phone, and the imposter turned out to be female in the end and therefore needed a reason to justify her more feminine-sounding voice. The sender of the email was justifiably both angry and creeped out and wanted to find that catfish. She started asking me a lot of questions about my life, but phrasing them like, "Is your sister's name blank, and did you go to blank high school?" Some of them were clearly information that anyone could glean from a quick browse of my profile, but then she asked, "Is your best friend blank?" Which struck me as odd since despite this person actually being my closest friend and who I spend the most time with, we have barely any Facebook photos together, and most are from a long time ago. Then she asked, "Were you adopted and are your half-siblings blank and blank?" Which sealed the deal for me since I knew for a fact I'd never posted about being adopted online. The sender of the email already had an idea that this person had known me in real life, but this confirmed it for me. The sender of the email had contacted me shortly after confronting the imposter for the first time. I guess after 2 years they'd finally become suspicious of the fact the imposter wouldn't show their face. I have no idea how it took this long for them to figure out that they were being played, but I'm glad they finally decided to give the ultimatum of, "Show your face or I'm cutting you off." I'm pretty sure this is the point where the imposter admitted to being a catfish and that she'd been using the identity of someone she had a crush on in high school before hanging up. I was given the URL so I could look through the profile myself, which was up for about 2 days after I saw it before it was all removed. It was definitely really bizarre. The imposter had posted more than I ever had on Facebook, and it genuinely seemed like they'd lived a pretty involved double life online as me. Almost everyone I'd posted photos with on my real profile would have their own fake profiles created that had enough content to be genuinely convincing that they could be tagged in and validate these new photos. Some of these profiles seem to have gone and made their own real friends as well, and I wondered if any of those were used to facilitate even more online dating deception. Either way, the amount of time that this person had spent fabricating their alter ego's online presence was pretty shocking. The whole time I'd been crawling down this Facebook rabbit hole, the sender of the email was looking through my real profile. After a while, she sent me a message saying, "Did you take these photographs?" and showed me what I remember as a black and white photos of a barn or something. I hadn't, which was weird since everything else on the fake profile originated with me and she noticed the discrepancy. We both tried reverse image searching with no luck. Then, either through a stroke of genius or somewhat suspiciously, I really couldn't tell, she thought to flip the fake number imposter had written into the fake Facebook profile around in reverse, and a Google search came up with a landline that belonged to the same home address of a girl that I'd gone to high school with. Real name was Facebook friends with real imposter profile, so we both went snooping around and found the photo that she claimed I'd taken, which pretty much confirmed to me that this was the imposter. I'm pretty sure that there were more indicators to the sender as well, but I can't remember. I thought about messaging her for a while, but I decided that it probably wouldn't lead to anything good. At the time, my thoughts were definitely, let's not meet. I talked a few times with the sender of the email just to try and decompress a bit, but honestly just wanted to distance myself from the situation and also had my suspicions about the sender as well. I figured maybe it was an imposter's one last-ditch effort to try and talk to me. Although when it was all over, the sender seemed eager to leave this all behind as well, so maybe not. Either way, it was a really strange experience. I felt mostly freaked out and violated, but I guess there was a small part of me that was flattered by it. I had a lot of mixed emotions. The weirdest part to me is that I'm a really approachable person and would have definitely been willing to talk and probably be friends if this person had just approached me instead. Although I'm still not sure if this was done out of obsession for me, or if this person felt like I was just a suitable image to base this fabricated persona off of. I remember talking to her probably twice throughout high school and really didn't have a very good idea of who she was other than a quiet hipster girl. If either person involved reads this, I'd definitely be happy to talk now. It's been years, but I've gone from being very put off to always wondered why this person chose me over a myriad of other more attractive or interesting people online to base their other life off of. According to the sender who contacted me, she probably spent more time online pretending to be me than she actually did going about her own life. I have a tumultuous history of addiction and have had plenty of my own escapes, which is why it's always fascinated me that someone would want to pretend to live someone else's life as a means of doing that. Because at the end of the day, the person pretending to be me had no idea that I spent my time daydreaming of being a different person as well. I guess it just goes to show that no matter how much you wish you were someone else, chances are that person has plenty of their own reasons to want to escape their own demons for their own reasons as well. In 2011, I was able to convince my grandparents to sign a waiver for me to enter into the Navy at the age of 17. Basic training went as well as it could have, but I was a fat kid and didn't pass the run, so I was sent back 4 weeks to do more training until the physical test came up again. This detail is important due to the butterfly effect. When I finally finished and had my orders of traveling to my A school, I ended up in Meridian, Mississippi, or BF nowhere. I was assigned to my class and I was taught a more specific guideline for my rate. There was somewhere between 15 to 20 people in my class. Not huge, but large enough to where people migrated between groups of 3 to 5 at a time so you could mingle with different groups to get to know one another. The kid I was when I started A school was very different. I was super shy, so when I would bounce from group to group, I was more of a listener than someone who engaged with the group unless I was specifically asked things. It was in that first week I would meet Katie. I introduced myself with a hello and she did the same. I had no idea that would be enough to cause her obsession. My base had a rec center. Inside of it, they had a PS4 gaming room, a movie room, an air hockey room, and music room. Because I didn't have a car at the time, and to get to what little town they had nearby was about $30 each way, I spent most of my time at that rec center at the bowling alley that they also had on base. Katie would also find me at one of these places and go on to talk to me endlessly about the things in her life. Maybe it was because I wasn't rude to shut her down right away, but she felt comfortable telling me things about her family and life growing up. But it was more so done to be heard than to converse about. I think in the 6 weeks I was there, I maybe said about 20 different words to her, and most of those were words of affirmation like, yeah, and I understand. I was already pretty uncomfortable as it seemed like every time I wasn't in my room, Katie was there to find me. Even as I started to get out of my own bubble and start to make some friends, Katie would be there and try to take over conversations other people were having with me so that she could talk to me. I would go to my chief to express my concerns and she assured me that they would get to the bottom of it. My chief was and is still heavily involved in the SRP program in the Navy, so she has seen all sorts of mental issues come by. While my chief respected her privacy and didn't disclose what they had talked about, she did ask me if I was leading Katie on, to which I had to explain that I never expressed interest, but I also never told her to just buzz off as I just wasn't raised that way. I don't know what magic my chief pulled, but she was able to get in contact with the person that would assign Katie's next duty station along with mine, as we had similar rates and most people at the time were set to go to Japan. Katie ended up getting orders to Norfolk, Virginia, while I got orders to Camp Pendleton, California. Our classes are already ended by this point, so we had only been waiting for these orders for an additional week or so. As everyone talked about their different duty stations, a select few that were going to Japan stood out. There was Katie and I, a girl that was set to go to Italy, and another that was set to go to Japan as well, but a completely different base compared to everyone else. So Katie found out that she wouldn't get to talk to me anymore. She tried so hard to get my number and said that she wanted me to take her virginity before she left. It was that which was enough for me to finally say that I wasn't interested and that I was glad to be getting away from her. It's probably among the meanest things I've ever said, but completely necessary in the context after weeks of obsession. Katie did not want to accept that though, and after she had been set away, she called the A school every single day trying to get a hold of both myself and my chief there, to the point where my chief asked to look through my phone to make sure I wasn't telling her one thing while still communicating with Katie. Our command LPO got in contact with Katie to get her to stop calling, and eventually I was off to California after a short stop at home beforehand. At Camp Pendleton, especially the Naval Hospital, unless you're a corpsman, you stick out as the newbie. And because of this, Katie went as far as to call my new command to ask if I made it there yet, pretending to be a concerned family member. Being a teenager, I made the mistake of letting the world see what I was doing via Facebook, like changing my location status and sharing that information without my account being privated. I now know better. I have a pretty unique last name, so with that info, Katie was able to see exactly which one I was and contacted my family members, as well as trying to tell them that she was a secret girlfriend of mine and wanted to know things about me. I'm not particularly close with my family, but they know enough that if I had someone special in my life, I would introduce them. And seeing as I had added many new friends I had made at A school and her not being one of them, thankfully their skepticism stopped them from divulging any more information about me. I had to send out an alert to my family to pass on to one another that she was a stalker and got them all to block her. I wasn't the only one Katie was stalking by this point. She had also started going after the chief that helped me break away from her, and this is what led me to keep in contact with that chief during my whole tenure in the military. After months and months of this, I had finally been able to move past Katie, and there wasn't anyone around any longer for her to contact to get to me. I would find out years later through my chief that in one last bold move, Katie would make a false assault charge in order to leave her command in the hopes of being transferred to mine. Of course, what ended up happening is that she got booted out of the Navy altogether. To think it all started over a hello, and probably wouldn't have happened to its degree had I finished boot camp when I was originally supposed to, always gets under my skin. This happened yesterday, so I'm still a bit shaken by it, especially after this morning. Yesterday I was waiting at my train station, sitting on the floor under a tree. I had my art poster tube carrier with me and nothing else. I'm a fine arts university student and I was on my way to class that day. I was listening to music and looking at my phone when I got this weird vibe that someone was looking at me. I snuck a peek a couple of times and saw a man walking up the ramp to the train station. He passed in front of me, walked a couple of steps forward, and then turned around and walked my direction. I took my headphones out and looked up. He was a tall, lanky man who looked to be in about his 30s. He was balding with almost shaved hair. He had those round glasses with thin frames, sporting a brown shirt with a rainbow collar, and his vibe was intensely uncomfortable. He quickly started talking to me, in English, not my country's language, and he asked if he could see my drawings. I found it weird, and though I've had people ask me to see my art, it was always while I was drawing. Nobody ever asked me to open my art carrier. Most people don't even recognize what it is. I nevertheless said okay, thinking nothing of it. I took out 2 of them and showed the man, saying, "It's nothing special, they're just exercises," following with, "I'm an art student." And I really regret saying this now, as there is only one art university where I live. The man complimented what I had shown him and sat next to me on the floor. This was my first sign to nope out of there, but then again, I never learn, do I? The man proceeded to tell me about him. He said that he had been in the country for a year and that he had no friends. He complimented me on my style. I'm sort of a rock, metal-loving person, and asked me what music I listen to. I realized this sounds like a normal conversation, but where I live, it's not normal to start talking to strangers, and the specific way in which he phrased everything was downright weird and intrusive. Also, everything had a hint of self-loathing. Now, I have had a couple of bad experiences in my life with creepy men, and I could not shake off the feeling that there was something deeply wrong with this man, like a certain sickly charm that only comes from a twisted individual. He focused the conversation a lot on himself, until he asked me if I was nervous. I replied, a little, as it's not normal for someone to start up a conversation just like that, at least not where I'm from. He said it was cute and started making weird excuses as to why he was randomly talking to me. It was cute that I was scared, apparently. He said he was from Belgium and was on paid leave for a month to go to a psychologist. He said the reason is that he was too good at his job and nobody gave him credit, so he had low self-esteem or something. As the train arrives, I point to it and say, "This is my train," expecting him to stay. But this man follows me and continues to talk like it was nothing, which at this point I became less and less responsive to. This man clearly had a superiority complex. He complained about being the best at his job and highly educated, and that nobody gave him enough credit or a raise, so much that it made it weird and awkward. He repeatedly pointed out that I was nervous, saying how I knew that if I was nervous, that meant I was more honest. He kept getting closer to me and I kept stepping away, wishing he would just give up. But alas, my stop came, and he followed me. I tried to say, "Oh, I have to go," and he followed me. I do admit I was polite the whole time, but I was in public and didn't want to cause a scene. Maybe I should have, in hindsight. We got off the train station and he started asking me more and more intrusive questions, ending with "Will you want to go for coffee later?" which I denied and said I have a boyfriend. He seemed angry. He told me girls only say that to stop a conversation, that he doesn't believe in exclusivity, to which I responded with a polite, "I understand, but I'm not in an open relationship and I'm loyal to my partner." He said you don't need to justify yourself and maybe I'll see you later in your station, leaving with a creepy smile on his face. This was when I was able to go to a different direction than him, and I walked as fast as I could, looking back the whole way to check if I was being followed. I spent the rest of the day uncomfortable and shaking from how eerie this man was. I asked my mom if she could give me a lift home since I ended class really late and didn't want to have to walk alone in the dark. I have never asked this before. This morning, after a bad night's sleep, I wake up, do my things, and later around the same time I would have been in the train station, I get a call from a Belgian number. One that I don't recognize. I checked the caller ID just in case it was a spam number or something. It wasn't. My heart sunk and the same feeling came back. I didn't leave the house today and missed class in fear of seeing that man again. I didn't give my contact info to him, but somehow I assumed this idiot got it. And then as I started talking to my friends about it, I realized maybe he already knew me from social media. So you know how if you have a business account, you can check if anyone saved your pictures on Instagram. Turns out the pictures of my face were saved. I don't have many on there, but the ones I do have been saved. I checked my followers and there were a couple of very sketchy accounts following me, which I blocked. I quickly turned all of my online presence to private and cleaned out my followers because, Lord knows, I realized I had posted 2 pictures of my stories at that train station this past week. One of those being on the day prior to this happening. And hey, maybe all of this is paranoia, but I will say, I've had a fair share of ill-intentioned men, and this bloke gave me the same exact feeling or worse, so I like to think that it's my instincts telling me this is a big nope. I'm gonna start walking around with a pocket knife just in case. I don't want to take any chances. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.